Dr. Bashir, if I can pitch it to you, that would be wonderful if you want to get us started.
Great. So it's really my pleasure to welcome Dr. Stephanie Studenski to today's call. I would be remiss if I didn't also give a shout out to Doug Lansettle, who is the new chair of biostatistics in the department in the School of Public Health. So Doug, we're really thrilled that you're here. I know we've been talking about getting big studies, and Stephanie is part of that mission to get our UB on the map with getting large clinical trials. And particularly we're here today to be focused about aging. So I wanted to tell everyone a little bit about Dr. Studenski's appointment. She is the Chief of Longitudinal Study Section at the National Institute of Aging. This underscores her significant contributions to the field. She brings a wealth of experience and expertise to today's Zoom, particularly in securing funding from the NIA and navigating really the complexities of research acquisition. I've known about Dr. Studenski for years because of colleagues that have worked with her, and she is known as an immense resource in what it takes to really become a center for aging and secure these large grants that are so important. As we really are focusing here on the elderly population, particularly in Western New York, which is an aging population, I believe that having Dr. Studenski's insights and promise will help guide and inform our endeavors. She also will help align our objectives and make sure that we have a deep understanding of what institutes such as the NIA are looking for. We really want to be able to work to bring our community and meet the needs of our community. As I think you've all heard me say, that I want to improve the health of Western New York across the lifespan. And as we focus on young and maternal mortality and all that on one spectrum, we also want to focus on the aging population. And we believe that really by drilling down and bringing in experts such as Stephanie, that we will be able to develop the infrastructure needed to be successful for some of these more major grants. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jill. I would be remiss if I didn't thank Dr. Cizak. She is amazing. She really helps drive the need to be very data driven. She formulates all of these programs, runs the seed funding programs, and I am immensely grateful for her expertise. So I'm going to turn it back over to you, Jill, and thank you again to Dr. Studenski for coming, and we're really appreciative.
With that said, Dr. Studenski, I think everybody is well aware because we circulated your bio of your other achievements and accomplishments. So thanks for joining us, and you're good to share. So whatever you need from me, I'm here and I'm driving, but thank you again for doing this.
Okay, thank you. Well, welcome and thank you all for joining us today. I'm going to share my screen where there's a PowerPoint. I put in a whole lot of links to give you resources that you can follow up with. So hopefully they work, but I'm also, we're recording this so you can see the links, and I'm sending Jill the PowerPoint in case you want the links that way. So let's see if we can get this to work. So we were on this topic, which was about training, and I went over some of the issues about training, but we are not going to open that link. There are 4 study sections within NIA that do different kinds of training proposal reviews. There's lots of sources of funding other than NIA. Here again are some. I'm not sure we're going to bother to open them up. The American Federation of Aging Research funds mid-sized grants between $50K and $250K. They're very influential. This tends to be pretty basic science, but certainly early mid-career investigators in aging, it is something great on your CV if you can get AFAR funding. Whoops. Retirement Research Foundation is more social and behavioral sciences funding. The VA used to have a separate independent aging research study section in its VA merit review portfolio, but now it doesn't so much, but a good deal of their health services research is still very aging focused. PCORI definitely funds aging research. There are people at Pitt who have PCORI funding to do aging research. And they have a priority in healthy aging. The John Hartford Foundation has a long history of funding aging research. They tend to be oriented towards demonstration projects to improve healthcare for older people. But again, they have a substantial endowment. They have mandatory distribution requirements, and they award a lot of money. Some of you may know more detail than I do about the National Science Foundation and Department of Defense. I have never written applications to them, but I have been involved in them. And what was most striking to me is that the entire application process is very different from the NIH. Applications are shorter and sort of more global perspective. The NIH expects a great deal of methodologic detail that you would never see in the NSF grants that I have been involved in. Here's some thoughts on how to get known. Here's some of the aging research meetings where I think a lot of the leadership and influence makers participate, are officers in the governance of these organizations. Again, for biology of aging, I'm not sure whether to try clicking on these again. Am I going to let you share so Jill, so we can go see AG?
Yes, let me do it for you. Let me just type in the addresses and then I'll pull them up.
So this is the American Aging Association. Their meeting is in June of this year in Madison, and it is one of the main preferred associations for basic science aging. Great place to meet people, make new connections. They tend to be oriented towards biogerontology, basic and early translational research. The officers are, again, very influential people in the biology of aging. So great place to make new friends. Jill, let's go to the next one. This is one of the ones I told you I thought would be of interest. I need to get my slides back. The Gordon conferences.
How's this? The Systems Aging Conference, is that the one you were thinking of?
All right, hold on. Can you guys see where it says find a conference now?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the Gordon conferences, and they do conferences on many topics, but they have a whole world of conferences in aging. I've been to one of them. They're wonderful. They're not all that big. You have to apply and be accepted to come. They're all over the world. So tend to be kind of basic science oriented. You can imagine that maybe it's hard to talk somebody into paying for you to go to Barcelona, but they do conferences in the States. I went to one in Maine that a lot of the lead thinkers in biology of aging were there and talking about sort of creative, cutting edge new things. So again, Portland, Maine, New Hampshire, Rhode Island. So I thought this was one of the best conferences I'd ever gone to, and would encourage you to consider finding one that's a good fit for your interests. I'm learning how to make this work. I think we can, I can do, Jill, I'm gonna try to keep doing this myself if I can keep making it work. The Gerontological Society, GSA, is probably the largest organization of aging. And I'm going to share, they have 4 arms that kind of parallel what you see with the NIH as well. Where is it? There it is. Okay, so again, it has biology of aging, behavioral and social, clinical, and does a lot of dementia work. Again, very influential organizational leadership in the field. Probably not as strong in the biology of aging as the other 2 that we've talked about. Very, very strong in things like epidemiology. We can go back to my PowerPoint now. This is a little bit about becoming an insider, really. We talked about finding out who's on the study section and the CSR rosters. These people are very active in the field. You certainly can go to talks by them and maybe step up and chat with them, or ask to have coffee with them at meetings. Same thing with program officers. It is part of their job responsibility to get to know the people in the field. I don't remember if we went, but if you go back to the NIA website, within those 4 divisions, you can open each one and they will list all of the people who are their program officers with their areas of interest, responsibility, and their contact information. And you can link that through topics from NIH Reporter. So you're not imposing, you're doing what they want you to do, which is interact between the research community and the NIH. You can get us, you look at the major aging journals. This, again, I think the GSA operates 2 big journals of gerontology. One is biologic and medical sciences, the other one's behavioral and social sciences. You can look at their editors and editorial board members to figure out who are influential people. Want to encourage you to find ways to review for aging journals. As you probably know, all journals desperately need reviewers. It's getting harder and harder for people to find time to review, but it's a great way to get known as smart and perspicacious. You send, I'm an editor. I've been an editor of a number of journals, and I'm still very involved in that world. And I can tell you that reviewers who send in thoughtful, articulate, focused reviews get noticed. We evaluate the quality of the reviews. People who are editors are leaders in their field. They're often well known. They're on study sections. So if, you know, they notice you, that's helpful to you when you submit grants. Most of these journals have booths at meetings. It's a way to try to connect. Most of the time when scientists are asked to review and they say they're too busy, they get asked, who would you recommend? Who else should I ask? So currently I'm an associate editor for aging for the JAMA Network Open Journal. And I very frequently get recommendations for reviewers from people I know who are too busy. And I enter them into my database and start inviting them, so I get to meet new people. I wanted to suggest you could consider joining professional societies, particularly AGE and GSA. Again, we're all busy, but this is a way to get known, is, offer to sit on one of the committees, particularly the research committees. It's another way to meet a lot of people. To the extent that people, scientists who are involved in aging, they can provide introductions to people you want to meet. Here's some of my thoughts on what many leading institutions do to help all the scientists become known and integrated into the field, as well as to help them submit the best possible proposals. So certainly the idea of taking some of these influence leaders in aging, their journal editors, their study section chairs, their professional organization leaders, inviting them to be speakers and setting up a 1.5 day visit. In addition to giving their talk, you set up meetings with scientists from the institution. I've always believed that having regular interaction as proposals are being developed is very helpful. The idea of just sitting down and writing a grant and hoping it's the best thing you ever wrote is not helpful. And so I think running a seminar series, whether it's once a month or it's retreats a few times a year, where people present idea pieces and I get critical feedback on design and method, perhaps at different levels, where there's one that's, first time idea, there's one that's more for a more developed idea. We do these kinds of things at many of the institutions I've been part of over my career. So having an internal peer review process for grants that are at the stage where there's a full proposal, having internal peer review done in enough time so that it can undergo further review. So we often recommend at least 8 weeks before submission time. And a lot of major institutions pay for external reviews of fairly mature proposals. And so I do this kind of thing a lot. When I was running Centers of Excellence in Aging, I regularly sent proposals from my folks out to other leaders outside the institution. And you have to pay enough to make them willing to do it. So if they're going to look at full proposals, I think you got to pay them for their time, probably a minimum of $250. Some will pay up to $1,000. Here's something that we could get Doug to comment on, which is it is not helpful to write your whole grant and then bring it to the statistician the week before it's due and say, can you make me a statistics section for my grant? And so you need to be involving your statisticians, even in basic science proposals these days, at the level of when you have a single page specific aims and hypotheses, and make sure that the statistician and you have communicated about the implications of design, sample size, analytic strategies, missing data, etc. And then I think institutions that want their scientists to be successful have to provide an organizational resource for grant submissions and management. And so you may already have that, but the idea that if the scientists do all this intellectual work, they should have adequate full support for getting the thing put together with all the required pieces and into the system. And if it's funded, helping manage it and all the budget reports and things afterwards. But I know it can be a real headache for the scientists if that part of the institution doesn't function well. Well, we got through that pretty quickly, and I'm interested in spending time discussing with you your feedback, questions, suggestions, concerns.
So first of all, thank you. Thank you for providing such a comprehensive overview. As I said to Dr. Bashir before everybody jumped on, you've been a wealth of knowledge. I mean, your success in the field is something that's a little daunting probably for everybody, because you've accomplished so much, everything from NIA to Pepper to a number of different opportunities. So if anybody is interested in posing a question, feel free to please just either put up your hand or throw
Oh, yeah.
something.
Don't be daunted. Yeah. Doug can tell you. Just a bunch of people trying to find our way. So where can I see? Here, I can see the grid. So you could do that little hand raise thing in the bottom, or you could raise your hand. Doug, do you want to comment on what you want from people in terms of involving statisticians in their proposals?
Sure, that would be great. Thank you for giving me the floor for a moment. I mean, I think you alluded to a lot of the really important things when you talked about the Institute's role. I love the idea with internal mechanisms. We had worked together, I think, with some overlapping when we were both at Pittsburgh in terms of internal review, bringing in external people. And you really hit the key point, I think, when you said, weeks, 4 or 6 weeks, 8 weeks in advance, because oftentimes when statisticians read statistical plans or try to write them, we just don't know the science well enough to get it right the first time. So, I often say I actually have a lot of bad ideas, but sometimes my bad ideas give other people good ideas. So I think the main thing is really, as you hit on, the time and just having lots of people look at. So I really appreciate your insight. Thank you.
Do you have a way, Doug, of linking investigators to members of your team? Is there a description of, who does more clinical trial, who does more, more comfortable with mechanistic things?
Well, with help from Dr. Bashir and funding some efforts we have going forward, I'll just mention I just got here about 6 weeks ago, so we're working on that. There's of course the CTSI and Greg Louding, who's the former chair, still with us, does a lot of great work there in terms of routing people. We're working on forming coordinating center efforts and other efforts, both with Dr. Bashir and in the health sciences and individual deans. I'm in the process of meeting and really understanding what people want. So I've just, encourage people to contact me. I think it's, we're working on building that right now, I'll say.
So I thought I saw a hand up. Dr. Waller, did you have a question? I thought I saw your hand up at one point.
Yeah, just a minor one. Again, thank you for the presentation. And perhaps I missed it because we were going back and forth between slides. Did you have the American Geriatric Society identified at all?
I didn't, and it's interesting because I have been very highly involved in the AGS my entire career, on the board, chaired the research committee. I think there is a role for AGS if you're doing very patient-oriented research. There's very little basic science at AGS. There is a branch of the National on Aging, it's the clinical geriatrics and clinical gerontology branch, that is pretty closely aligned with the American Geriatric Society. And the Pepper centers are pretty closely aligned with both the American Geriatric Society and the clinical branch of the NIA. So I think you're right. You know, I think going to AGS for cutting edge research, it's a pretty applied meeting. There will be NIA people at AGS, so if you want to meet, particularly those program officers who are from the geriatrics and clinical gerontology branch, they always go to AGS. And so if your research is very focused towards clinically relevant human studies research, it's a good meeting. So thanks for bringing that up, Bob. I think you're exactly right.
And if you could contrast, because you had highlighted American Gerontological Society, I guess contrast the two. Are you saying that AGS is more clinically focused?
Yeah. So American Geriatric Society is heavily health professionals, and so it's multidisciplinary. There are physicians, nurses, social workers, PTOT, speech, pretty heavily medical and nursing. The GSA is much broader and much, much bigger. GSA is orders of magnitude larger meeting, probably much stronger in behavioral and social sciences, not as strong as age in basic sciences. I'm embarrassed I left out AGS. I guess I just think of it these days as a very applied meeting. But it does have very strong links to Pepper Centers and geriatrics and clinical gerontology. You will meet NIA program people at any of these meetings.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Well, thanks for bringing it up.
Dr. Studenski, can you just talk for a minute or two? I'm looking for some questions, but talk about how you might have conceived of the Pepper Centers that you were part of and that you led, and what you think makes for a unique concept, because it's extremely competitive, and I think you've done it twice now, correct?
4 times.
How many?
4.
Okay, sorry.
They a lot of work. Yeah. So I was first involved in Pepper Centers at Duke, and then for a variety of reasons, I spent a decade at the University of Kansas, and then I was at the University of Pittsburgh, and I did Pepper Centers at all of them. And I think a key is to build on local strengths. And so at every institution, the question was sort of, how do we build some important areas of research with important unknowns that bring together the skill set and resources that I have here? And it's very different at different kinds of institutions. Some of the problems at Duke were that Duke is such a gigantic and successful institution that aging was never an institutional priority. It was kind of like, good luck, you guys, but we're gonna do giant cancer stuff or whatever. And at Kansas, there were different issues. We didn't have as many well-established investigators, but it also meant people were eager to work together. They saw an opportunity. But the Kansas Pepper Center was built out of, what is it called, local materials. What were the strengths of some of the people we had around us. And we had to do some recruiting to fill in some gaps in the team. But I think we chose a topic that was very different than other pepper centers. At that time, we were very interested in geriatric rehab. And we did some pretty cutting edge looking at some aspects of stroke rehab and also cognition in stroke at a time, this is well over 20 years ago, when there was very little focus on cognitive impairment in stroke. And we also did some basic science work on ischemic brain injury recovery in monkeys. And so we just found these different players and people and said, what can we put together that is interesting and builds on our strengths? And then at Pittsburgh, there were a lot more strengths. There were big programs in epi of aging and in biomechanics and aging, lots of rehab, tons of basic science wasn't as strong, but one of the things was that for some reason, they just hadn't got everybody on the same page. I don't know what Doug would say about that, but there were, huge psychiatry aging, huge dementia aging, big Alzheimer's center. So somehow the trick there was to figure out what the incentives were for people to work together, because they didn't have to. They could all be successful on their own. And so we created a pepper center that spread the money around. We didn't try to keep it all for ourselves. And we said, yeah, you got these big grants, but you really don't have access to a lot of pilot money. You don't have access to a lot of training support. There's some infrastructure things that would be beneficial to share. So to me, it was about figuring out what the strengths and limitations of very different institutions were and what was going to work. And then I do think I have some strengths in like putting together a set of themes, ideas, questions that give lots of neat people a chance to be in the game. So that was at every place I've been. I think it's been a sort of an art to figure out how do we find some questions that engage different kinds of scientists and create opportunities for different kinds of people.
Thank you. I do have one last question, unless anybody else puts their hand up, but we have been working pretty diligently and they've been very, very kind and supportive, the leadership at PCORI to engage on a lot of different levels, because there's no question that the strengths of the university in many ways situates in some of the clinical things that are being done across the community. And as Dr. Brashear said, she has a commitment to not only advancing research, but making sure that it improves the health of our neighbors and our community members. So any thoughts that you have on PCORI? Where we've had program officers speak twice. We've had LOIs be invited to full proposal. We've had some success with it, but do you have any thoughts about PCORI and the aging research space that you might want to just mention? Because you did talk about it a little bit earlier.
So I have colleagues who have PCORI funding. And I think the thing I was most struck by is that the expectations and elements of the required structure of those grants are very different than NIH, especially this whole thing about community input and community members on the review sections. And so it's a much more inclusive view of what's important research. You know, I think you can get, frankly, get lots of stuff funded at the NIH that the community couldn't care about at all and has never been asked to it. Or, you know, people who propose human studies and haven't thought about whether there's any humans that would be willing to do their study. So, you know, it's much more user respectful in some ways, which I think is a good thing, but I think it's important you have to understand how to do that, understand how to deal with lay community reviewers and speak to, you know, why they should be supportive of your proposal. I think they, again, just through the experience of my colleagues, they monitor the progress of the grants meticulously, perhaps more meticulously than sometimes at NIH. You know, if you have a clinical trial at NIH, you do have to report accrual and they'll keep up with you. But I can tell you for a lot of grants, just come up with some sort of progress and you're okay. But I think timelines were much more carefully monitored by PCORI. So I have never written a PCORI grant, just what I've heard secondhand. I was around when PCORI was created and knew the first, wasn't, what's his name? Chuck from Minnesota. Wasn't he the first head of PCORI? He's from aging.
Yes, having helped investigators put proposals together, I can tell you, yes, their milestones template is something to be said within itself. There's no question as far as the timeline and achievables. Yeah.
And community input.
Yes, agreed.
Right.
Agreed. And they were originally calling it stakeholders, but now they're actually saying community partners. They're changing the terminology currently. They don't want it to be termed stakeholders any longer, so they're transitioning. But I just want to say from my vantage, so thank you so much for everything that you've done for us. I don't think that people in the course of the last hour probably completely understand how impactful you've been for UB and how generous you've been with your expertise. I've learned a lot, still continuing to learn. We have a lot to build. What I would share with the group is that Dr. Studenski, she is consulting with us. So, you know, if you have interest in any of the things that we've just discussed, she's the one that's really trying to help us frame out to be better in the space and more engaged in the space and represent all of your work more actively out in the community. So please don't reach out to her directly, you know, go through my office so that we can actually make sure she's not being flooded with requests and that sort of thing. But she is a tremendous resource for us, and we're very fortunate to have her engaged as we try to build, because there's definite recognition that we have so many tremendous strengths. I mean, I'm looking across the street, Dr. Lancettle just joined us. We've got Dr. Waller in the School of Pharmacy. We've got Dr. Lamont doing great work in public health. I mean, there's so much happening, and now it's just a matter of harnessing all of it and making sure that we represent all of them well. So, Dr. Studenski, thanks again. You've been amazing. And for all of you who have any interest in following up on it, yes, I've recorded. Yes, we're going to share slides. Next steps are, everybody knows, and I shared it with Dr. Studenski yesterday because she helped frame it all out. We've got the seed funding opportunities for aging that were distributed. So if you didn't get a copy of it, you should, because it's supposed to be going to all the listservs across the health sciences. But if you didn't, that's an opportunity for you to get a project started and collect some preliminary data and apply for some seed funds. And as Dr. Studenski mentioned, and she's explained to me a number of different times, the travel funds that we have available are very strategic. So if you have a chance to attend a conference and speak about your work and talk about what the university is doing, or just try and weave your way into the space even more so based on her recommendations, we have those funds available as well. So feel free to drop me an email and reach out. But Dr. Studenski, thank you so much again.
you.
Very much appreciate it.